because one, we needed to put something together to show how to use this, and as people gave us questions about things that they had problems with, we would add to this example code and just kind of keep building it up as we had time and questions from people. So the first thing I'm going to do is just talk about a quick overview of what's there. We have two different languages that we've built example code in Java and C#. In the Java code, we have our biggest, most filled out example is the Spring Web Service client. And the reason we filled that out the most is that because we use Spring. So that was the easiest for us to start building up, and we had been building that as our own some testing for ourselves, and we just add to that as necessary to show off examples. The Spring Web Service code has kind of three sub-parts to it that slightly build on each other. There's this command client, and what that does is allows you to, from a command line, submit a SOAP message to the usage core. So if you build up a SOAP message of a create incident request, place it in just a plain text XML file, you can submit it through the command line to a core. The async client was built up to show really how to deal with asynchronous callbacks, or actually not asynchronous callbacks, but asynchronous completion of your requests. So if you remember in one of the talks I gave a while ago, there's a possibility that if you are not on the owning core, that you may get a response that says your request is pending. And what you'll need to do then is wait for a notification about that update to the work product that says that it's actually accepted. Then once I put that together, again, like I said before, as I got more questions on different services and doing different things, I added to that example. That example also I tried to put together sort of a framework, and I'll show that in a little bit in the class diagram on this code, of how you can reuse this framework potentially if it fits with your application to sort of cache stuff from the core, all the work products and incidents. And the RM application is built on top of the async type of framework, and you can run that client in two different modes. One is a sender or a receiver, and it just sends an EDXL RM message. So it gives you an example of how to send one between two different clients. Continuing on the Java side, we had several people who were using Access 2, so we went ahead and built up a small Access 2 client. It's not as well developed, but it does at least go through the basics of create, update, close, and archive of an actual incident, showing how to get those calls to happen within an Access 2 framework. And last, we have some C# code, because we had lots of clients out there building in C#. And one of the issues with C# and the Microsoft framework is that their automatic code parsers, or their WSDL and schema parsers, are not well developed, and they have lots of problems, especially with the EDXL RM specification and the GML specification from OGC. So both of those caused the C# problem. So what I did here was built up an example of how to actually build up the XML request objects from using the link technology from Microsoft. So I've covered several services in there, and I'll talk about a little more details on those as we go. The one thing that all three of them do is the basic incident lifecycle. So they'll create, update, close, and archive an incident. So there's an example in all three of those of doing that set of services. The example code's available on the download server where you downloaded the core. I actually just posted an update today, so there's a new link on there that will show Java and C# code or .NET code updated as of today. Just cleaned up a few things and as I was going through it, and we had already added some more things since we had done the release, so I went ahead and put together another release of that software. So looking at the Spring Web Service client, what I did was I walked down the different things that it does. It starts out with the basics, just like we've gone over in the last several talks. If it doesn't have the resource profile I want, it will create it. If it doesn't find the resource instance to represent itself, it'll go ahead and create one. Then it uses get matching messages to basically cache up what's currently on the core. And if you remember, I talked about the get matching messages is that when you use that operation, it will give you back a list of notifications that the current work products on the core, for the current work products on the core that match your subscriptions in your resource profile. So I kind of like to think of it as, tell me, everything that happened or currently what's current has happened that I would have gotten notifications about had I been listening since then. So that allows you to create a new resource instance and then find out what's on the core so you can get up to speed and get started. The example then goes on to continue on to process notifications, and anytime it receives using get messages at that time, and anytime it gets an update to a work product, it finds the incident that it's associated with and updates the current local cached version of that work product. Then it does a create, update, close, and archive on the incident, and then again it shows how to check status on updating an incident and wait if the update was pending. One thing about the Java code, and I state this about the Access Code 2 code too, we use the XML beans representation of the SOAP messages. You can actually use the jar files right out of the distribution of the install kit to build with. And in fact, if you do read the README in the Java code, there's a little batch file that will go in and pull those out of the install kit and post those appropriately into your local Maven repository so you can use them. Now, if we take a look at the framework for the Java example code, you can see it's sort of built up around the same concepts of the core. So we have a core in the center there who contains multiple usage incidents with multiple work products attached to them. And then I have a class that manages all the incidents, which is a work product listener, such that whenever the usage core processes incoming notifications, it will post events to each of the listeners who will then do whatever they need to do with them. And in this instance, the usage instance manager will find what instance of the usage incident class represents the incident for that work product and update that version of the work product for that incident. And then hanging off the bottom there are things that represent the resource instance, which is the application instance, and the resource profile. And all of those, if you take a look at them, they show how to use to build up a request to create and register applications and profiles, and how to update. Up in the top, the usage incident will show you how to create and update, close and archive an incident. All right, before I go on, does anybody have any questions?
Hey, Roger.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to. Did you have a quick explanation of why you guys prefer to use the Spring framework?
No, that was 2 years ago when we started. We looked around and looked at some of the frameworks we wanted to use. We had some people who were familiar with Spring, and so that's it looked like we like to use the inversion of control and the for the dependency injection. So we do everything with the application context files for configuring and starting up these applications, and actually the core is built that way also.
But in terms of the client side, do you think there's strengths over the other frameworks?
I'm not sure if I could say that. I mean, mainly we used it because since we built everything else in Spring, it was the easiest for us just to jump over and use the Spring clients.
Got it.
I haven't built much of the other clients. I didn't build the Access 2 code, so I'm not that familiar with it. Now, I have built the C# code, and because of the pains that we have to go through, that doesn't make it that easy. So I'm not sure I could compare them.
Okay.
The other frameworks. And I think there was another question.
This is Tony Boydek with TNL. I'm just wondering where the agreements agreements to share data is in this process? Where does this happen in this?
Yeah, mostly, if you remember, what we've said is that the best way to deal with agreements is to use the admin console to create them. So those are created offline, and those are things that you're not going to really manipulate at runtime. Those will be things that you've set up. Those are more binding agreements between locations. So you'll have those pre-configured before you start any of this.
Does any of the code need to go look at those agreements? Or
no, it really shouldn't.
Okay.
No, it really shouldn't.
Doesn't the core need to check the agreements before it notifies the listener?
The core actually will take care of all of that. The clients that access the web services don't need to worry about that.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Hey, Roger, Jim, Eric Kent here, if I can make a comment.
Sure.
Two. One, possibly, could we maybe hold, instead of on the Thursday weekly call, maybe an occasional workshop to actually work through this on a very technical level?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, we could.
Because I think a lot of us are a little bit more visual, and then on the flip side of that, for those of us who are a little less technical, in the operations world, spring or not spring, does it really mean anything to the end operator? Probably not, but somebody might ask. I'm sure half the people on the phone are not propeller heads, right?
Right, and you're correct. From the operational side, spring or access to, nobody sees that. That's the down under the covers, basically. So yeah, I think maybe putting together the workshops might not be a bad idea.
Yeah, and I mean a real working workshop, so where we're sitting down and maybe watching you actually build something, and then those of us who are maybe not so technical, we can drag some of our technical folks along to do it in conjunction with them.
All right, we'll give it some thought. I think that's a great idea.
Yeah.
And if I can help you guys with that, please let me know. I'm more than happy to do that.
Absolutely. We will take any suggestions offline. You can email either Chip or Roger or Jim, and or give any of us a call.
Yeah,
I think that's a great idea.
Thanks for entertaining that. Appreciate it.
Okay. Anyone else? All right. As I said before, the Access 2 at least goes through the full life cycle of incidents. It gets the list of incidents. It'll get a list of closed incidents to see what's there. And then also just does the create, update, close, and archive an incident. The Access 2 code, example code, is also an example of the file-driven code. Like the command line client that I mentioned before, you can build up a SOAP request in XML and then submit it through this. And again, this uses the XML beans representation. Now this class, I didn't build up a class diagram for this because there really isn't any. It's just a straight shot going through these things in this example. So, but the code, since I used the XML beans on the Access 2 code also, that whole framework from the other Java could be, from the Spring Java client, could be adapted to use with Access 2 calls, because really it gets down to the point where at the very bottom, both of those frameworks take an XML beans representation of your operation request and just post it in different ways. But they all take the XML beans representation at the final end there. Now the C# code I built up, there's a few different operations in here because of people we were working with off and on through different demonstrations. This one again will create a resource instance if it doesn't exist, and then get a list of current incidents, and it does the same thing of getting a list of incidents, getting all the associated work products, and caching up all that information locally so you have the latest version. And every time you process work products, it will update the local versions of the full work product. Now the thing this does differently is it also does show examples of updating the ICS work product and adding a layer to the map work product. So those are two different work products that aren't in either of the other examples, but are shown in this example. And then again, it goes through the close update archive of an incident. As I mentioned before, this uses the link technology to parse out and create the SOAP messages, and it's not as easy as using the generated code, but it still isn't terrible to put together. It's a little easier than some other parsing, but it's not as easy as any generated code, but you can still get all this to work. Taking a look at the class diagram on this, again, off the main, we have a list of incidents. We have a resource instance that represents represents the resource instance that this application is using. And then for handling the service calls here, I built a bunch of classes that represent each of the services that hang off or that are derived from a service proxy, which handles the lowest level interaction with the core. But each of these services allows you to kind of build up the correct messages and then use the service proxy calls to proxy the call back and forth between the server, the core. Does anybody have any questions on that, on the C# code? All right. So we've talked about this diagram over the last couple of calls, and what I'm going to do now is just give 3 short examples of the different code. I'm going to show in the Axis 2, I'm going to show how to update an incident. With C#, I'll show an example of getting your message and processing notifications, and then with the Java Spring client, we'll show how to register a resource instance. So what this really does is builds up an XML beans representation of your request, and then sends it uses your web service client, which is a Spring provided class, to send it to the client. So the first thing this does, as I mentioned before, is it calls get existing resource instance, which is a different method than this, that gets a list of resource instances and sees if that one exists. If it doesn't, then it's going to go ahead and check its profile to see if that exists and create it if it does not. And last, if the resource instance doesn't exist, then it will create a new request, add the appropriate information, which would be the ID, the local identifier, the resource profile ID that you want this instance to use, and then using the web service client from Spring, go ahead and send that request. And when it comes back, what will be in there is a register response document or a SOAP exception, which will get caught as or SOAP fault, which will get caught as an exception. And I have removed a lot of some of the error checking in here just to get it to show up on the slide a little easier. So there's more error checking within the actual code. And then last, we pull out the actual resource instance from the response so that we can use it later. In particular, when we're getting messages, we'll take the endpoint out of that resource instance, as we showed in the first set of slides on talking through the services, and use that in get messages request. All right, any questions on that? Okay. In the Axis 2 code, we're going to go ahead and get the incident document. So at the very beginning here, we're working through updating an incident. So the first thing we do is get the incident document, which is the most recent version. It'll actually, that method there, get incident, goes to the core and gets the most recent version. Here you can see what we get back is a work product, which is an XML beans object, and we'll ask to get the package identification or the work product identification element out of it. You see those all caps are constants defined in this class earlier, based on the qualified name of the element. If we get one of those back, we will grab the incident identifier, and then we'll also use the get structured payload from the work product to get the payload of the work product and parse that back into an actual incident document using the XML beans. Once we finish that, we can actually get down to and get the activity description We just add a little bit of text to the activity description and then set the new value. And then following this is where we would actually put it back together, just like we did that request for creating the resource instance in a update incident request, and pass that back through the Spring or the Access2 calls using their proxy objects to send the request to the server or the core. So this gives an example of how to pull apart a work product and get to the information. Anybody any questions on that?
One quick question. It looks like it assumes that there's one incident. It says get incident. There's no identifier. What is? I mean, if you have more than one incident running on a core.
Oh, that's because this method is actually within an incident object, so it knows what incident it's representing.
Okay.
So that means it probably should be renamed to like get current incident document would be a better name for that operation probably.
Okay.
Anyone else? All right. And last but not least, the C# client. At the very top, you'll see that we called the notification service proxy that I showed in the class diagrams, which will take the get messages, will build up a get messages request using the resource instance information and return you an array of XML elements that are your notifications. Next, we just iterate through those, and we use the notification service to pull the work, or a helper method on the notification service to pull the work product identifier out of the current notifications, so that we can then eventually go check and get the full work product. And if it's an incident type work product, we're going to go ahead and tell the incident to update itself based on the values from the new work product. Otherwise, we're going to tell it to process an associated work product, which means it will just, in this case, it will just store it. Now here is, looking at this is where your code is going to have to start tying in. When you start looking at this, you need to make decisions on what does it mean when I get an update to an incident, and what does it mean when I get an update to any of the associated work products with respect to my internal data model and what I'm going to show and how I'm going to parse and map it into my internals such that I can present it to my user correctly or do whatever it is I need to do with that information. So this is the real basics of getting it and getting the latest information and taking as sort of an event-driven system. Here, I've got a new update. What do I do with this? The last part of the if statement shows handling a work product deleted. So we check if it's, once we get a work product deleted that goes along with this incident, which should check here to make sure it's an incident document getting work product deleted. And then it'll go ahead and archive the incident, which does a close-in archive inside this class, which handles the closing and archiving of an incident with respect to the local incident. So it removes it from the current cache. And again, here, what you'll want to do is when you see this come in, you're going to have to decide what does it mean to remove it from my local information. So if I'm just putting dots on the map, when I receive an incident work product being deleted, I'm going to go ahead and remove that dot from the map because that incident got closed. And that's the last slide I have. So does anybody have any questions on any of that? All right. Well, if you think of any later, just shoot me an email, or you can post them up on the uses.us site. Either way, and I should get them. Thanks.
Yeah, that's obviously a lot to digest on the fly like that, so please take a look at it, play with the code, and remember our hotline is always open. Roger's available 24 hours a day. No problem anytime. Right, Roger?
Sure, it'll sit in my inbox.
So we've got, this is the fourth of our sort of tutorial sessions, Every one of them is recorded and posted up onto the USIN's collaboration platform, and within a few days I usually get them out with some chapters associated with it, but they're should be available later on today if you want to just go back and go over anything that you heard today. And remember, you can ask questions directly on the collaboration platform. If something rolls by and you wonder about it, you just click on comment, and you'll shoot a note off that Roger gets and be able to ask him within the context of this call exactly something that you need to know. So feel free to use that to refresh yourself and also to point your technical people to it. As I think it was Eric said, he's at a certain level, but there are real coders that sit under him, and they should be turning to these sessions, grabbing a hold, and asking questions back themselves. So feel free to make use of that resource, our on-demand training sessions as well. Having done 4 of these, I'd be interested in any thoughts, comments. I thought the suggestion that we get sort of a roll up your sleeves and let's really get down to it, I think that's a really good one. I think that we could schedule a couple sessions, and I would appreciate any topics that any of you might want to offer, but we could schedule them live in the Washington, D.C. area, and we could webcast them out to anybody else, recording all that, and be able to get a good interactive session going in Washington, people out on the phone, and then also, obviously, storing in our collaboration platform so that anybody later on can do it. So would be interested in topics that you would like to address that to, and if you have topics, let me know whether you are in the Washington area and would be able to join us, or whether you'd be interested in doing it in the webinar format. But at this point, any thoughts on these 4 sessions? Anything we can do to improve our ability to communicate all this to you?
Or as a follow-on, is there, what would be next? Is there anything else that we could present that would help people out?
I think we might be able to answer that question a little better after we've absorbed what we just saw.
Yeah,
okay.
Understand.
Yeah, and after you have the time to look through the example code and kind of track through it.
All right, then let's go to our last and ever popular topic of anything about anything from anybody. No? Well, then let me wish you all an excellent next couple of weeks. We're always here and always available, so postcards, letters, emails, phone calls. Let us know what we can do to keep you moving forward in this process, and we will reconfigure then in 2 weeks. Bye, everybody. Thanks a lot.